without further ado, I'm going to introduce Kris Jurski of the People's Audit.
Thank you very much. I was waiting for that, Lou. Thanks. I usually like to start out by telling a little bit about myself and why I'm kind of driven a little bit, wired differently for this event. With election integrity, I was first generation Polish, basically. Both my parents were legal Polish immigrants. I was born in the United States. But at the time, I was a cocky little teenager from New Jersey. I had the great pleasure of going to Poland and seeing communism before the wall came down, and it completely changed my life. I came back, kissed the ground, tried to inhale anything I could about trying to understand what United States was. We heard speakers earlier that talked about being generation or sons of the Revolutionary War and having the Declaration of Independence. Immigrants on the other side, they don't know unless you have that comparison. And especially if you're born here and you're indoctrinated through the schools, you just have no idea. But when I came back from Poland, I was completely changed, and a lot of my stories from my childhood started to make sense. For example, when I was maybe 9, 10 years old, my aunt was standing in what would be like a typical supermarket bakery and started crying. And I didn't understand why. I was like, why is she crying about bread? But then when you go to Poland and you stand for 3 hours in line to get a piece of bread that you could beat somebody to death, you start to understand how blessed we are here and how much abundance we have here. And I can't stress enough how important it is to be in this fight. And I'm going to try and share also the parallels with Venezuela, because as fate would have it, I joined the military again, kissed the ground, being a patriot, joined the military, did my 4 years, came out, met a beautiful Venezuelan woman, as fate would have it, and then basically watched her country get dismantled over an election. While the wall was coming down in Poland and my family was becoming free, her country was basically being ushered into slavery. And another thing that was juxtaposed of that situation, two kind of very stark parallels. My family in Poland was all farmers. They weren't even allowed to grow what they were allowed to grow. My grandfather had an orchard. A lot of my family did animals as well as all kinds of stock. But because of the way communism was, everything was controlled by food. You had basically little coupons and you weren't allowed to have anything. Even when you tried to grow something, there was people that would come on your land and inspect and basically take away animals, take away crops. So everything was controlled by food. On the other hand, my family in Venezuela was actually very upper class. My wife, I married up. She was basically in a class where in 2003 when I was there, I was about this close to moving there because it reminded me of San Diego, California. A lot of her family was they owned businesses. Some of her family was even in movies and TV because they had their own soap opera and kind of Hollywood there. And as well as a lot of her family were in politics and diplomats. But when I listened to Chavez, I would turn to her family and say, you guys understand what he's saying here? This is not going to end well. I was just learning Spanish, and of course they're just like, oh, you don't understand. We have to take care of the poor people. And at that time, Venezuela was so rich that gas was, I think, about 12 cents a gallon. They said housekeepers had housekeepers. And essentially, anywhere you would go in the country, they would have literally taxi cabs so you could get a private flight to Miami just to go shopping. And it was a joke that oh, it's so cheap, tan barato dame dos, which means that's so cheap, give me 2 of them. And today, fast forward after 12 years, this rich, smart, intellectual country has essentially been duped into socialism. And today, they're starving. I have to send money to my mother-in-law down there because you can't even buy meat. And the thing is that you can walk down the streets and what would be the equivalent of $100 bills stacked are tied together, and you could probably fill multiple dump trucks with all that cash. Nobody wants to even pick it up because $1.4 billion or 1.4 million believers is worth 40 cents. And that's what's coming for us. And I can tell you right now, because it's deja vu all over again. As soon as 2020 happened, I heard every same echo that they said in Venezuela. Best election ever. Media basically just parroting that over and over again. You're an election denier. They even went as far in Venezuela as they would sit on the street with petitions and say, did you have any problem with that election? And when you would put your name and phone number down, somebody would come to your house and beat the hell out of you, because they basically were that thuggish to make sure that whole election was completely stolen. So I can't stress enough how important it is. Poland was taken over by bullets, but Venezuela was taken over by ballots. That's what I want to make sure. And this is the most important election ever, but we can't give up even if it doesn't go our way. So I wanted to go over basically what we've learned so far, what can be done, and most importantly, where to focus next, because that's probably the thing I've already committed myself. I know this is going to be a lifetime thing, and many of us in this room are already in it. So what happened during the 2020 of hindsight, or hindsight 2020? We all saw the Detroit where they were blocking everything up. A lot of good people went and started dealing with the machines and working with the machines, and there's still a lot of stuff there. I commend Sheriff Darleaf for taking on that task, because that's so important. But for me, I watched vote by mail, and I saw that surge in vote by mail, and I wanted to know, how are they doing that? Like, how are they basically stealing vote by mail? So that's primarily what I basically focused my attention on. And we came across this situation just by a show of hands. Is anybody familiar with the Red Belly Road story? Good, it's getting better. I keep on using it as a sample just to see how far it gets out. Red Belly Road was a situation literally 2 years in the primary, what's name now, Florida primary. We're watching the addresses. My background is I helped both public and private companies clean databases, clean addresses. Addresses were just basically my specialty. So I jumped in and just started checking with the post office and seeing if addresses were good or not. And this road jumped out at us specifically for me because it's near my hometown. And it was called Red Belly Road. Couldn't find it in Google, couldn't find it in Zillow, wasn't in the tax records. We're trying to understand what this is. A whole street of people are registered there. At that moment, we're thinking we found these mysterious phantoms everybody keeps on talking about. But we were just trying to understand, like, what is going on here? So we grabbed those voter IDs that were in that pool, and we dropped them in the 2020 data, which we had. And lo and behold, all these people are now on 12th Street. So wait a minute, 12th Street, we looked up their deeds. Everything is legit. Those are the real people. What's going on here? Why did their addresses switch from 12th Street to Red Belly Road? And this happened in June, which is specifically in Florida, if you understand the law and the time frame, they're not allowed to touch the voter rolls in June. Everything's supposed to be locked down as far as addresses. Well, as we're watching this, we can clearly see that vote by mail requests were actually requested to this fictitious road. And most importantly, the system showed them as being delivered, which to this day, we still haven't had a good explanation to understand. And then as we're watching this, again, this is all in real time, right before the election, probably about a week before the election, and we start making this announcement, the address switches back to 12th Street. So if you're following along, the addresses were originally 12th Street. In June, they switched to Red Belly Road. And then 2 weeks before the election, they switched back to the real address. We waited till after the election and went out to canvass this street. Nobody on that road knew what we were talking about. Nobody knew what Red Belly Road was. Nobody asked for a mail-in ballot. That was the most important thing. And then as fate would have it, just like this was a God thing, we're at the last house on the end of the street, and the lady says, yeah, I did get my voter ID card. And we're like, ma'am, can you go get it, like to see what it is? And as she's walking back out with it, the mail carrier's walking up at the same thing. We're looking at her card, and on her card is printed Red Belly Road, because in Florida at that moment, we actually had a redistricting that everybody got new information cards. This wasn't my spreadsheet. This was actually printed, and if you look at the date there, July 14th, that means that card was printed all the way up to July 14th during the election, because our election that year was August 20th, and then shortly after it got switched back to 12th Street. So we asked the mail carrier what was going on. He's like, well, it was the strangest thing. All this political mail started coming into this area. I've never heard of Red Belly Road, didn't know what to do with it. So most of it went back. But these couples I've known for 20 years, so I was able to deliver it as soon as I saw their name. But the thing is I think this is essentially what we found here, is how people walk into the poll booth and they're being told that they've already voted. If you notice the person on the screen there, that's Lake County Alan Hayes. I was just telling somebody a few minutes ago, all we did was we went to our Lake County Sheriff at the time and said, Sheriff, is there any way that we could have people, if they find out that they're standing at the polls and they're being told they already voted, could they at least file a police report and just say, hey, this is a possible identity theft? The moment Alan Hayes heard this, he literally had a press conference. I think our email list at the time was like 200 people. He had a press conference list with a meltdown. That's not the law. The law is you fill out a provisional ballot. Now, why is that? Because all we were trying to do is just have another person outside of the elections office track that this is happening. Because every time we would ask the elections officials, they were like, nope, everything was perfect. Best election ever. So that's still an issue, because to this day, Alan Hayes has never really been able to fully explain that. We went to the Epoch Times. We were doing a story with them at the time. Alan Hayes immediately said that he was using the 911 system. I'm not exactly sure, because last time I checked, ambulances don't deliver mail. But he said he used that system, and the Epoch Times called Lake County 911. They're like, we never heard of Red Belly Road. There is no Red Belly Road in Claremont. So still, to this day, nothing's been fully explained. But there is a solution to all this. Essentially, why I was in business for the last 20 years is working through services that, in the end, work with the post office. There's a system from the post office that probably everybody in this room has touched. If you've ever ordered anything online, the whole reason that you can pick up your cell phone and make sure that you don't worry about anything because it's going to get delivered to your doorstep is a system called CAS. If you've ordered anything online and you've gotten a prompt that said, can you confirm your address? That is essentially what we use to verify all the addresses in the voter rolls. Why the supervisor elections can't do that is beyond me. Because if you go out to anything from a Etsy store that's selling beads all the way up to $1 billion company, Amazon, everybody uses this. And they've been using it since FedEx basically started doing mail. So there is absolutely no excuse why we're not using this system, and more importantly, the waste that is generated by all of this undeliverable mail. If you watched the supervisor elections, literally like baker's racks, like I showed you before, and they have to sit there and store this and haul it and then go through it one by one and mark people as undeliverable, when you can literally just do what I do and just go to the post office and do it all electronically. We check 16 million voter rolls in the state of Florida in about 2-3 hours. So what did we do because of this? It really changed the game, because before that moment, everybody was looking at the voter rolls like a static, kind of like a ticker tape. You're just watching that one instance of what's happening. When we saw that Red Belly Road thing, we knew that we had to do snapshots analysis. And I actually have a background in this because I used to catch people stealing from payroll and things like that by just taking a snapshot and saying, okay, there's the reconciled bank statement. And then a couple weeks later, you'd see the report that's being handed to the owner or the investors and be like, that's not the number that was reconciled. And then next thing you know, handcuffs come out, because it's really hard to make an explanation of why are you changing reconciled bank statements? So that's what we started to do with the voter rolls. We literally scan monthly reports, 16 million, and compare them every month. And we found some interesting things. Like I mentioned before about the Red Belly Road address breaks, another one is reactivations. So with reactivations, you have somebody that looked like they moved, they went inactive. We found somebody in the state that found the Fountain of Youth. They went from being a 59-year-old man in one county to a 36-year-old person in a new county with a new last name. And then the other one is reinsertions. Reinsertions are really sneaky, because literally they're putting somebody that registered in maybe 1960s, they put them back on the voter rolls to just vote, and then they immediately delete them right after the election. And that leads me to the mass deletions. The mass deletions is probably the one thing that we really didn't see when we were looking, because everybody's looking for like insertions into the voter rolls. They're thinking they're making people up. But it's much more easier to delete voters than it is to add voters. And what we've caught in West Palm Beach, Trumps County, is probably the most startling. If you're looking down here, this is a table that we've created that in each row, it counts how many people are added to the voter rolls of West Palm Beach, moved in, moved out, removed, and then just like a cash flow statement, we can find the net. If you're following along from the May all the way down to December, if you look, you'll see it highlighted as 60,000 people were removed the month of the election in Palm Beach County. That was already bad enough because we didn't know, because we actually went and we had to vote by mail for records for these people, and we did find that people were voting. There were people that sent in a mail-in ballot in October, and they were still deleted in that monthly dump. But more startling, in the December, if you see in red there, they added 57,000 people back. And if you're following along those averages, nothing makes sense there. But just like Kamala's favorite little Venn diagram, we laid the voters on top of one another, and we found out 53,000 people were removed for just 1 month during the election in November of 2022 in Palm Beach County. To this day, Wendy Link has never explained that. We got a nice, one of the most friendliest calls I've ever had, because I was usually getting yelled at by the supervisor elections. But to that moment, she was like, well, Mr. Jurski, I can explain this. This was just a glitch. And I was like, man, that is a really convenient glitch that happened right there during the election. Can you please, because I'm the VP of FRA and I'm working with the Epoch Times, can you please just write up an email and explain to me in writing what happened? Because I don't want to misconstrue anything or miscommunicate what you're saying. Can you give me a full explanation of what happened in writing so I can communicate that? That was it. Cut off communication. And that was the end of that story. But we just basically, to this day, haven't had an explanation. So the good news about all of this system, and I really want to take some time, because right after this, let me just explain something. If you're looking at this report, we tracked all the way back to 2020 to what we did here recently in April of 2024. The good news is with this system, and most importantly, the grassroots. If you are working in the grassroots, can you please stand up? I know you guys over there, USA, Defend Florida, we have here, please stand up. Everybody that was canvassing, these are the people that you need to thank, because these are the people that went out in August. These are the people that went out in the hot days of August, canvassed. These are the people that work tireless number of hours and constantly, the legislation even that we've put forward and the lobbying and everything to basically help. That's the reason this state is red now. Because with this, we removed 1.2 million people out of the voter rolls. And if you look closely in the next column, the grand majority, again, nothing was put forward that this was only Democrats. We just said that these were bad addresses, and you need to look at these bad addresses. Out of the grand majority, close to 1 million of them were Democrat. And 250,000 were, yes, sir. Yeah, Scott Pressler, too. Yep. Yeah, Scott Pressler and Evan Powers out there knocking on doors, getting new people registered. That's why we have this 1 million people that we have now. But the real reason is, in reality, if you look at the active voter rolls, we've lost voters. And to this day, they won't explain like what was going on in 2020. But this is the whole, this graph tells you right here. Florida was Democrat when we first started in 2020. It was trending Republican, but you could see those numbers were very slow turning. But with the work that we did we turned in 2020 a 97,000 Democrat advantage to now this number has been updated to over 1 million Republican. And I keep telling people, it's not get out the vote, it's cleaning your voter rolls is going to make your state red again. And we're not out of the swamp yet, because this last recent election, we just literally built a whole deck of reports that specifically is going after mail-in ballots. Some of the most egregious things that we just saw with this last election. There was about 2.3 million ballots that went out that were asked for mail-in ballots. There was 65,000 questionable addresses. 36,000 people somehow got a mail-in ballot and they weren't on the voter rolls. We call them orphans. For some reason, I don't know how that even happens. We had 8,000 people that were inactive voters that still got a ballot, and 15,000 duplicates, that these are people that are registered in multiple counties, and same voter asking for a mail-in ballot in multiple counties. So where do we focus? That's probably the most important thing here because we got a pressing election. It's a big country and there's a lot to look at, but Seth Keshel, who we work closely with, has focused on 30 counties and 9 states. These are the most critical counties that we absolutely have to have monitoring on. In reality, we were on this list in 2020 with Seth Keshel, and because of these good folks helping us out, we're now off that list. He originally had this predicted for 10 states that were going to be critical. So we have Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, of course, North Carolina, New Hampshire, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Milwaukee and Texas. We're already monitoring right now today, Florida. Like I said, we had about 16 million records and we cleaned off 1.2 million. I'm feeling confident about Texas, although we do have spikes going on there, but we have 20 million records being monitored since November. We got a great team there. It grew from 5 people to about 100 people very quickly, so I'm confident that Texas will stay red. Georgia, however, I'm not as confident with. We're watching about 8 million voters there, but it just, I'll show you a graph here in just a second about it. And North Carolina, we're watching 9 million records. We already have about 150,000 bad addresses there. Georgia, as you can see, this is again one of our vote maintenance reports. We can tell if the electors are doing their job, the elections offices are doing their job. If you pay attention to that inactive and remove column, you'll see it's hardly anything. They're not removing anybody from the voter rolls. And in fact, if you look at the net, they've already added 200-some thousand votes to that. If you put that in comparison with what I'm showing you in Florida, how is it that all these people are moving to Georgia? And in reality, there's people that die and move all the time. They're not moving anybody back into the inactive column. So Georgia is probably the most important state that we have to watch in this next election. And again, like I said, Seth Keshel is predicting that Florida is going to win in 16 points now because of all this work. Like I said earlier, we're currently monitoring Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, and Texas, and we're also working right now as we speak to set up Arizona, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Again, I've been dedicating my entire business to this. I've literally put everything on the line. I was originally fired from my, investors just because of my politics during the COVID schemes. But if you feel moved and you can help out through either volunteering or donations, I really appreciate it, going to thepeoplesaudit.org. And also here's my contact information as well as social media. We primarily post to Telegram, but I'm also trying to put some more posts on Substacks. I think we have a couple minutes for questions if we needed anything from the audience. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, from Florida. It's a combination, but the thing about the system is everything's tagged. So if they're brought back to vote, we can clearly see they're being reactivated. So everything is tagged. We know when we have 20 months worth of voter rolls being monitored now in Florida. It's really hard for them to do something. In reality, I have everything back to 2012 if I wanted to load it. Yes, ma'am. In the end, Florida has a constitutional type office for the supervisor elections. They're granted a lot of power. And the weird thing is as you talk to them, as you get across the table from them, you can tell that they're just as hostage as us. Most of what's happening is in Tallahassee. Tallahassee is dictating down to them what systems they're allowed to use. Perfect example is the machines, the vendors. Like VR Systems is a vendor that runs all of the websites and all of the voter rolls and also gives the final election night. So, I mean, they literally have entirely control over the entire elections as far as the results go. But the supervisor elections, I feel like every time we sit down with them, they're just as held hostage as we are. They really can't do much. It's basically Tallahassee watching over their shoulder. And if you've seen reports recently, it was Michigan, I believe. The Michigan Secretary of State there literally just said, like, you're going to certify that election. We know where you are. We'll come after you if you don't. So that's the kind of environment we're in right now. I mean, the biggest thing is I see Florida it's much more camouflaged. The problems we have are much more camouflaged. Yes, sir.
After the election, tell us about audit, how is it one to get an audit going, what type of costs are there to have an audit for a precinct, or for a county, or for the state?
Personally, it's a good question. Like if it's volunteer driven and the citizens step forward to do that work, of course it's going to be it's going to be much less if they bring in paid employees to do all that stuff. But as far as everything that we've seen in Florida, they have refused, and they've even closed their transparency. We're constantly battling that. So I would hope that we could get to the point where we can do hand count ballots, but even audits, we have to ask those things. Yes, sir.
Yeah, this is great work, thank you. My question is, it's all rear view mirror. When the election's occurring, are you going to be able to see the things are shifting days before or during the mail-in ballot? Can you do something with that data?
Well, that's a good question. Basically, with the mail-in ballots that we're watching is the first time we can watch the elections in near real time. Again, I'm getting the files the day after, but I'll give you one example that we've already seen. They're front-loading the elections. So typically, like this last election, we saw just as many votes come in on July 22nd and 29th, 2 days in a row, as they did on Election Day. And all those ballots are typically basically scanned and everything's done and counted right when the early voting starts. The challenge is being able to challenge those ballots. The elections officials have even threatened me. They said if you challenge a ballot, like if you challenge more than 6 ballots, you're going to be brought up on voter suppression charges. So that's really what it is. If you read the election law, the person that has the most standing and that has the best chance at challenging those ballots are the candidates. So if we can find candidates in those races, then we can use those candidates to basically contest those elections. Yes, sir. No, thank you. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. Again, listening to the supervisor elections, it doesn't make any sense because we can clearly see people that get deleted like 2 weeks after they vote, and then you have people that, like you said, they haven't voted in 8 years and are still sitting there inactive. All we've been doing now is we're constantly tagging and monitoring and then showing those reports to the supervisor elections. The reason that this is working, especially like with United Sovereigns American, these are all groups coming together, working together as coalitions. The reason I'm here is because we'd love to work with the sheriffs and basically start bringing this forward, but the grassroots work. This is only 2 years worth of work, and it's really been a miracle to basically get these many people cleaned off, but we still have way more work to do, and specifically the USA's lawsuit is something to look at because they're putting a check on the board for just about every state. The most important thing about their legislation is they'll have standing in court, and they have a very unique way of looking at this because they're challenging this in federal court, suing the states as a civil rights infringement, which I do believe is true. It's the biggest thing is can we find a good judge and support to basically hold up. Yes, sir. No, we're watching the whole state. Harris is by far the worst, but if we can get together afterwards, I'll be sure to give you some more information about the people we know there. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we have volunteers in just about in every major county in Texas. And the biggest thing is working with the volunteers, and we can get you basically access. And most importantly, we'll give you immediately things that you can challenge. especially voters that there's all kinds of problems in Texas with bad addresses, duplicate voters, things like that, just to name a few. But I do have to wrap up. I really appreciate being here, and thank you, and God bless for everybody. Thank you.